When I was young, I was always very fascinated by what happened around the world. I remember having two big maps that would hang up in at this big bedroom in this old house where they made the bedrooms really big. And on one wall I had a big world map, and on one wall I had a big US map. And the US map was really not so interesting to me. I was always looking at the world map and planning travels and planning where I would go. I didn't really understand what it was like to be in business.
Yeah. So, Andrew, our listeners are, we have a strong entrepreneur listener, audience. One thing that we find in common with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, is they had an upbringing where even from the very get-go, they just kind of knew, I think about things differently. I approach problems differently. I am sure that is no different from you and your experience. So let's start at the beginning. Was third grade Andrew Henderson I'm going to go conquer, I'm going to travel the globe and move assets overseas, or give us the initial background of the Nomad Capitalist origins?
Well, I appreciate you having me. When I was young, I was always very fascinated by what happened around the world. I remember having two big maps that would hang up at this big bedroom in this old house where they made the bedrooms really big. And on one wall I had a big world map, and on one wall I had a big US map. And the US map was really not so interesting to me. I was always looking at the world map and planning travels and planning where I would go. I didn't really understand what it was like to be in business until about 12. So that's still a pretty young age, I guess, to be involved in business. And I realized I wanted to be, at that time it was Bill Gates. And so it's interesting to see some of the people that I followed and kind of idolized as a kid now coming back into the public debate in interesting ways. But I was very interested in tech, and I was very interested in him. And I think what I liked was that he was kind of a conqueror, and it was very interesting to me to take over. And so as I got more interested in business, I started looking at, how do I put the two things together? I started looking at, could I do business in London, or could I do business in other places in the world? And I won't say that as a kid I figured it all out, but as a kid I did get a great permission slip from my father that I think speaks to what you're talking about, which is you don't have to stay here in the city, the state, the country to support your family, and you should go where you're treated best. Those became 5 very prescient words: go where you're treated best. And it's the words that we live by here at Nomad Capitalist, which was, everyone else is sticking around out of sense of obligation. We're going to take care of ourselves. You should focus on yourself. And by doing that, you can have the greatest impact for yourself, your family, the world. And I think that was a great starting point at a young age, at 12, 13 years old, to realize that you don't have to do things the way most of the people do it. You can make decisions that are different and that are out of the system.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into that. I don't want to turn this a psychology session, but kind of, how did your parents or your dad kind of shape that? I mean, was he a traveler, or was he just, was he trying to get you out of where you're at? Was he trying to get you out of Cleveland because you made him mad?
Well, I think my father realized there are ebbs and flows to society and to cultures and to nations, and sure. We did some traveling for sure. He was, pretty successful in a smaller business, and so that afforded us some nice trips. I mean, he always took me on the industry trips. I remember, 14 years old, going and walking around Manhattan for the first time on my own, because I went on an industry trip with him there, and so I got to see some interesting places and be around some interesting people growing up. He was not going to the jungles of Borneo or to the Amazon, whatever the case may be. But he did study, and he said back in the mid-90s, he said Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and Argentina are countries that probably have a lot more promise than the United States. I think he was right on 3 out of 4 of those. Certainly Australia perhaps is kind of turning the way of the United States now, but they've been very prescient suggestions to go and explore. And he just said, the U.S. is not going to be the best place for entrepreneurs. And he kind of saw what you're seeing right now 25 years ago, which was you're going to see people who are successful reviled. You're going to see it be evil to make money, to have a business. And I think he saw those early signs. And I even remember one time I came down, I was in this kind of advanced program in school in fifth or sixth grade. And they wrote an article about us in the big city newspaper saying how we were a bunch of, whatever they called us, who were, nasal gaving and building macaroni sculptures all day. And I said, this kind of hurts. He said, get used to it. This is what happens when you achieve anything in life. And I think he realized what the direction that the U.S. would go and the West would go. And I think we've seen that play out today.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. There is very much so like, if I had what he had, I would have done the same exact thing. And it's, for the most part, it's not true, right? I mean, you've probably witnessed that where it's like you've probably seen a lot of people where they were blessed and they didn't do near as much as they could have. And people who didn't have as much that, through hard work, were able to accomplish a lot more than, people who are more fortunate.
Well, yeah. And I also think that he looked at it from the perspective of, this was the best place for me, right? Sure. I'm hopefully having our first conference in a number of 5 years coming up. And one of the people that we just put on our list of speakers, we've got Robert Kiyosaki, we've got the former president of Georgia, we've got some others. But I said, just for fun, let's call, what does it take to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to come? And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, Arnold Schwarzenegger's pitch to your people is how he went when he was treated best back when he did it. Right. I mean, that was the place to go when you were coming from where he was from and when he moved. Now it's different. And so I think, my upbringing kind of focused on the fact that you wouldn't leave the United States. You wouldn't even consider it in 1953. Right. I mean, even when I was born, 1984, the best place in the world to be born, followed by, I believe, West Germany. Okay, so that kind of tells you how the world has changed. It's not the case anymore. The United States is not in the top 20. I think that's what we kind of looked forward to. And I think that it kind of, just kind of gelled with our family's approach to life as well, which was kind of what you mentioned. Not everyone who has an opportunity makes the most of it. I remember, going to my father's office as a kid, and I'd be like, how come you have the big office and this guy has the small office with no window? It's like, well, that guy's much more talented, but he's got a bad attitude, quite frankly, and nobody likes him. And that's why even though he's much better than I am, quite frankly, his natural talent doesn't get ahead. And I think that it really taught me a lot. I think you can probably apply the same thing to countries. Countries have natural talents, and sometimes they squander them. Sometimes they chase their best people away. And I think you're seeing that right now in the West.
I'm gonna also call Venezuela a little bit on that one with all the natural resources and amazing people. I can't tell you when I've traveled how many people from Venezuela, especially doctors and lawyers I've met.
People.
They all fled a long time ago. That brain drain from Venezuela happened, probably a decade ago, or maybe more. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's jump from, so you have that experience, a young kid, 12, 14, you get into college. And I mean, what kind of happened in college?
Barely,
what was that?
Barely, maybe.
Barely, maybe. Well, first of all, where'd you go to college? Or where'd you start going to college?
So when I was in high school, I just wanted to be in business. And I went back because I'm a citizen of St. Lucia is one of my second citizenships. And to become a citizen of St. Lucia in all these Caribbean countries, you have to submit every document from your entire life. And so I had my elementary school transcript, my middle school transcript, my high school transcript. I was looking at them a couple weeks ago. I didn't actually do as bad as I thought. It was actually not so terrible. But I thought in high school I'm doing terrible because all my friends went on to become doctors and really smart people. And I was just kind of bumming around. And so my parents said, you know what, we're sick of waiting around. We're at least going to leave the cold, frigid weather and high taxes in the U.S. side of Ohio, of Cleveland, and we're going to move to Arizona. I'm like, all right, fine. I'm 18 years old. I'm looking to meet some good-looking chicks, and that seems like the place to go. All right, Arizona State, here we come. Oh, you have more than a 1.2 GPA? Come right in. Okay, so there I went.
You talk about going from polar opposites on the thermostat too.
Right.
I mean, frigid Ohio to Arizona. I mean, geesh.
And by the way, I mean, there's one thing being out of the U.S. I do appreciate Ohio, and I appreciate the values of Ohio that are not maybe present as much in every place. And I think that I still kind of have that Ohio thing in me, even though I don't consider myself an American anymore. But I went to Arizona State for a year, and basically I was staying up all night. Kind of like last time before this show, I was up every night till 4 or 5 in the morning, watching stuff about various businesses, watching news, watching financial news. I remember, on the West Coast, you'd wake up to the financial shows at 3 a.m. part of the year because it was on Pacific time, and they start at 6 a.m. in New York, and I was watching that kind of stuff. And I would go to bed at 5 a.m, and surprise, surprise, I'd miss a lot of those 8:30 classes. And so I kind of, I don't know if they said, we don't want you, or if you can come back, but we're keeping our eye on you. And so I kind of pretty quickly slunk out and just had to make a go of it in the business world.
Yeah. So quick annual sign. I grew up in Northern California. I had 3 buddies from my high school class that went to Arizona. They all lasted a semester also. So I think they're on the same schedule you were on at Arizona.
Arizona would be a step up, though. And that's where the smart people went to, was the University of Arizona. Arizona State was like, you got some problems.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's where David Spade went. So you guys, you and David Spade are right there next to each other. So.
That's right.
We saw David Spade a while back in the broadcasting industry. Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
So you don't finish college, but you said you want to be in business that whole time, right? So I mean, that was just kind of you're like, I want to. Why learn about making money when I can go out and just try and make it myself, right? That's kind of the entrepreneurial drive, anyways, right? Like,
and did you run into any of that where people are like, "Why are you going into business? You didn't even stick through college. Like, what are you doing?" Because I think most people kind of think like the natural thing is, you go to school, you go to high school, college, business. Is there any pushback on like you can't just shift gear? You can't skip a gear.
Well, I mean, I was not exactly the prom king, nor did I want to be, and that just wasn't my mode. So, the one thing in high school that really got me out of my shell was I got a job at an Italian restaurant, and I was the host, and I had to talk to all these cute girls from the schools around me. And so that was the one thing that forced me to get out. But otherwise, I was not a highly sociable person back then, and I think that, to your point, I kind of intuitively felt, but couldn't voice it because just, you're 18 years old, 19 years old, that, what am I learning here that's really applying to actual? So, just the other day, I'm almost 36, and I thought of something. I said, we're looking at maybe acquiring a few smaller, companies on our supply chain. I'm thinking, maybe going to some finance classes would have helped a little bit. But it was one of the first times ever that I'm like, what does this really mean? What do I need this for? And so I don't know that I was surrounded by anybody who was telling me not to do it. I think I was basically just doing my own thing in a way that an 18 or 19-year-old would, which is kind of stumbling through it, thinking that but you don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, but I was kind of talking about something that's kind of in your wheelhouse a little bit bigger, but how do you see education? You live on a global scale now, and you see the kind of how education, and you hire people from different countries in the world. And especially now with COVID and everybody, getting educated online and Zoom classes that everybody's tired of. But how do you see the education shift, pre-COVID, even, post-COVID now changing, right? I mean, is that education, that degree, is it as important as it ever was, or is it becoming less important? Kind of how do you see that shifting on that global scale?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because one thing I do think is the nomad world, you can look at it from the people that I work with who are very wealthy people who want to go live in Dubai or want to split their time between Dubai and, Mexico City or whatever the case may be, Kuala Lumpur, where I am now. And then you also have the digital nomad crowd, which is these younger kids who oftentimes, they're backpacking or they're just, going and working, on laptops at cafes around the world. And I think that it's possible to get into a bubble where you think that's the future of the world. I'll tell you what I see around the world. There's a lot of people who have not adapted to this. I mean, we've gone into certain markets with the attempt of hiring. Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't, where the idea of what we do is fascinating. It's the first time they ever heard about it. And yet, you could talk to certain people who do what I do, and it's just, routine. And so,
right.
My thought is, for the time being, the majority of people still want to have jobs. You've seen cultures of forced entrepreneurship in places like India, where there just aren't enough jobs and people have to be entrepreneurs. I think there's perhaps a culture of that in Turkey or Armenia. There's a certain forced entrepreneurship because maybe you were from a minority culture where nobody would hire you. You're the Chinese in many places in Southeast Asia, for example, or the Albanians in places in the Balkans. And so there are cultures that have that, but I think a lot of people in a lot of countries, they're still looking at the corporate job. And I think there's a lot of places where, Serbia, for example, we have a big presence there. A lot of parents are still telling their kids, make sure you go and get a safe job that has a pension, go to university, get some silly degree. And, I think it's going to take a while before people told me what my father told me to do, which is do your own thing. I think a lot of other countries, especially if you're an American, there is a greater sense of conformity in some of them. Not all of them, but some of them.
Sure.
So I don't know that there's. I think you can say incremental change. I don't really look at education. Although I will say this, there are some countries where, as much as I say college degree doesn't matter, there are some countries where the only people not going to college because of this conditioning is people who really have no ambition. And it's almost kind of a litmus test for ambition because that is the culture.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And that's a very wise statement. That totally makes sense. You can't get ahead if you don't have an education. It's kind of like, cart before the horse type thing. You have to go get the education so you can actually go create the business. It opens the more doors to get in. Whereas in America, you're kind of seeing this different shift in the education part of like, hey, do I need to go to Harvard anymore? Is that really that big of a benefit? We're doing online classes for the next 3 years, and I'm paying $50,000 a year. I mean, is that really a benefit to me as a person?
I don't know. It's very interesting because I look at so many things in life as name brands. I paid extra for a wallet. It's a Prada wallet. People say, oh, it's a waste of money. Who would pay that much money for a wallet with a little logo on it? I like nice wallets, but to me, Harvard or the United States as a country, those are name brands.
Sure.
And are they going to be worth it anymore? I happen to think on a country level, name brands are becoming increasingly overpriced and uninteresting. I'm not as deep into the educational system to know that perhaps there are connections you can get from going to Harvard. Sure. But I do think it'll be less relevant in the future.
Yeah. And as the face of that kind of changes, surprisingly, the internet and technology is changing lots of industries, right? Like right before our very eyes, ones that you would never thought of would have changed, which is kind of cool.
I think whatever change we do that does happen is going to happen pretty quick, though, because I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it was probably around 25% of people for the current fall semester re-registered to a school that was cheaper and closer to home. So I think people are starting to weigh that maybe I don't need to maybe I don't need to go all the way down to San Diego, or I don't need to go to New York City. I could stay local, close to mom and dad, and save a few bucks and not be.
Well, here's the other thing, by the way, that Americans are doing in particular. I know this is so true all around the world, but they're also going into large amounts of debt in some cases to go to these expensive schools. I mean, there are kids who will go to fancy private schools and they will take out $200,000 in loans. I just had a gentleman yesterday. We've got a lot more doctors that have been reaching out to us lately as they're concerned about what's happening in the U.S. and in the West. They're not planning to move overseas or save on taxes, but they want to have a plan B. And I talked to a doctor who got $600,000 in student loans. Now, he's doing pretty well, but how many people go to Harvard and get an art degree with $300,000 in debt? Yeah. You're an indentured servant. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.